Tongan Health Centre. Jenny and her father were involved in founding the health centre or chain of health centres that we're visiting today. So I just wanted to acknowledge you, Jenny, before we get underway. Today I have announced Labor's commitment to extending Pharmac funding. In government, we've increased Pharmac funding significantly, and we're going to continue to do so. The extra $1 billion that we're going to put into Pharmac over the next 4 years will mean that under a Labor government, a re-elected Labor government, the overall budget for Pharmac will have increased by 62%. That's a pretty proud track record in contrast to the 25% funding increase that they got under the last national government over the 9 years that they were in government. That's allowed them to fund a range of new medications and expand access to existing medications, all at a time when we clearly understand that the cost of everything has been going up as well. We're committed to continuing to increase Pharmac funding. And I would note that that is in contrast with the National Party, who want to cut access to free prescriptions in order to fund a hand-picked group of cancer drugs. That doesn't do anything for the other people who are waiting for information on whether they're going to be able to get access to the medicines that they might like to access. There are a range of other health conditions that would be ignored under National's plan, and people who are currently able to access free prescriptions would no longer be able to do that under their plan. I think it's another example of, day by day, the risks that New Zealanders see from a coalition of chaos and cuts that a National Act New Zealand First government would be. I wanted to share a few observations with you that they have said about each other before we get into questions today. For example, David Seymour has described Winston Peters as the least trustworthy person in New Zealand politics and has said, "We're not going to be sitting around the cabinet table with this clown." He then said that he wouldn't fight Winston Peters because it would be elder abuse. Winston Peters retorted that David Seymour reminds me of a chihuahua at the front gate barking at every cat, human being or fellow dog that passes by. He then said David Seymour discovered his Māoriness the same way Columbus discovered America, purely by accident, and went on to make a number of other comments. But he then went on to say of David Seymour, "I've spent much of my career respecting and working for retirees," and then accused David Seymour of wanting to euthanise them, and then said, "As for your nasty comments about my physical, I reckon you'd last about 10 seconds in the ring with me," which is about how long a National Act New Zealand First government would be able to hold it together. Clearly, the idea of a government involving Winston Peters and David Seymour would be a recipe for chaos. It wouldn't be in New Zealand's best interests, and the best way for New Zealanders to avoid that is to give their party vote to Labour.
Is this all a bit desperate? I mean, you're coming out here with these pre-prepared lines after a poll yesterday, and the Herald this morning showed that you have a 0.2 percentage point of chance of forming a government. Coming out here with those lines, all a bit desperate.
I think New Zealanders deserve to know what kind of government they would get under a National Act New Zealand First coalition, which would be chaos, and it would be cuts, and it would grind New Zealand to a halt.
But you seem to be spending more time talking about this coalition of cuts and chaos than you are talking about Labour.
Because that's the big risk in this campaign.
Those comments have been made in the past, though, and it does seem like both David Seymour and Winston Peters have calmed down the rhetoric we saw in the minor parties debate last week. They conceded they could work with each other. So is it really fair for you to bring those comments up now? I mean, they've cooled the temperature on that.
I disagree. I mean, they still clearly dislike each other.
How will you fund the Pharmac spend?
Sorry, what was that?
The Pharmac spend announced today.
So we'll be setting out our fiscal plan this week, which will set out how we're going to fund all of the commitments that we have made. It will be our fiscal plan, just to put that into context. Most of our fiscal plan is out there already. It's the pre-election fiscal update. The I guess if you like, addendum that we will be putting out there in terms of Labour's fiscal plan will very much identify how we're funding each of the commitments that we're making in this campaign.
When will that be? When will that come out?
This week.
Whereabouts is that money coming from exactly? Because you can hear what National's going to say, that $1 billion over 4 years, Labour's just spending money that they don't have. So where is it coming from? The new spending allowance, and we'll set out in detail in our alternative fiscal plan how that breaks down. Bearing in mind that if we don't put this extra funding into Pharmac, they're actually going to have to reduce the medications that they're currently funding. So the National Party, if they are not going to make a similar commitment, are going to actually be reducing the medications available to New Zealanders. That's $181 million.
That's right, every year. Yeah, and that actually does make up the lion's share of the $1 billion.
What's your thinking about putting the money into the pot and letting Pharmac make those calls?
I think it's important that we've got a system that doesn't have politicians handpicking which drugs get funded and which don't. The last thing I would want to see is New Zealand become like other countries around the world where the pharmaceutical lobby has a disproportionate influence over access to medications. We've got a system in New Zealand that means that medical experts are making those decisions, and I'd be very reluctant for us to move away from that.
Labour is down in the last night's poll, and you were down in popularity. Are you still the right person to lead the Labour Party?
The Labour Party was relatively static in last night's poll, and what we've seen is National and ACT are starting to come down again. I think as New Zealanders see the risk of a National ACT government, I think those numbers will shift.
Can I ask you about
Labour and National before you say they haven't done either? It's been 2 weeks since pre-FIB. Why are you guys taking so long to get your fiscal plan out when this is what voters actually need to know in order to make a decision?
Well, the bulk of our fiscal plan is the pre-election fiscal update. We are the current government. The bulk of what's in there is actually the government's fiscal plan.
So if the minority that is left, then why did it take more than 2 weeks to actually bother?
Well, just because we haven't announced them all. Today was one of the last big announcements that we've got, and so hence we'll now be able to tally those up and show you how we're going to pay for them.
In a leaked video, your candidate Ibrahim Omar said in a candidate meeting about a wealth tax that it's, quote, part of the discussion. I think there's going to be time for that, and the Labour Party hasn't given up on that. I mean, are you hiding the fact that you'd be keen on a wealth tax?
No, he's wrong there. We're definitely not implementing a wealth tax.
So why are your candidates going around and talking about it then? I mean, I feel you've been quite clear on this. Why are your candidates lacking the discipline?
I'll certainly take that up with him, but we're definitely not implementing a wealth tax.
Are there discussions happening though within the Labour caucus about a wealth tax? Are they ongoing?
No, absolutely not.
Can I ask you about National's proposal today when it comes to welfare? Is there any evidence that harsher sanctions work?
Harsher sanctions don't work. National's plan today would simply result in more children living in poverty, because that's what happened last time. And this from a National Party that also wants to put thousands of people out of work right before Christmas, which is their stated intention.
It sounds good, though, to some Kiwis who think, oh yeah, crack down on welfare. Is this a political move?
We're getting record numbers of people off benefits and into work. The National Party wants to sack all of the people who are involved in getting those people off benefits and into work. I actually think it's a good investment to invest in upskilling them, to invest in supporting them into sustainable employment.
Overseas voting starts today as well. Do you feel like you've peaked where you need to be as people start to put their votes into the ballot box?
Oh, clearly not. You know, we've still got 3 weeks of campaigning. I'm going to be campaigning hard for every single one of those days.
Do you think you've done enough, though, given that some people are going to be voting already? So in theory, you should have done all of your stuff by now.
Oh, you never stop campaigning until the very last votes have been cast.
You said this was one of your last major policies, so have you got something else to convince people to switch back to Labour?
I was speaking about that in the context of spending commitments.
Joe Biden, the White House has formally recognised Niue as an independent and sovereign state. Did New Zealand have a heads up on that?
Yes, I was aware that was coming. That's the way the American system works. So in order to recognise those specific countries, the wording that they use is they recognise their sovereignty, but actually they also recognise, through diplomatic channels, the unique constitutional relationship that those countries have with New Zealand as well.
Does it change the fact that Niue is officially part of New Zealand's territory?
So are the Cook Islands, but the conversations that we have had is they recognise the unique constitutional relationship with New Zealand, but in order to recognise those countries, they have to, I guess, declare them sovereign. Those countries have participated in their own right in the Pacific Islands Forum, which New Zealand is also a part of. We recognise that they have a special relationship with New Zealand, but we also recognise that as countries they have a right to make their own decisions as well.
When did you first know about this?
I think I read a briefing note on it over the weekend, potentially.
And then from a New Zealand perspective, you have no problem with the United States developing its own one-on-one relationship with a country like Niue?
Absolutely not, and we welcome the United States playing a more active role in forming relationships with Pacific countries.
Can I ask you a question about banking
yes.
now? Is it acceptable for banks to be reporting record highs or close to record highs when many of the customers are really struggling with the cost of living, and what would you do about it?
No, I don't think that that's acceptable. Now, we have to bear in mind that these things do come in cycles, though, but I do think that the banks have a responsibility to make sure they're supporting their borrowers through a difficult economic cycle.
What could you do, or what would you look to do?
Well, I want to see the banks actually making sure that they're supporting people through a difficult economic cycle. That means supporting people who might be getting themselves into, mild financial distress because of increases in interest rates and so on. And we have, through the conversations that I've had with the banks, seen evidence to suggest that they're trying to do that. So spreading repayments over a longer period of time, interest, principal repayment holidays. They're doing a variety of things to support people when they're finding the current going tough.
Can you just remind me, have you done your 10th cost of living measure yet, or you've got one to go?
We've got one to go.
So you've got that to go, and presumably you need to announce that before you put your fiscal plan out, yeah?
You'll wait and see.
So you've got one cost of living measure to go. Have you got any other policy on top of that? How much policy have you got to go before your fiscal plan?
We've still got a few. Well, we've still got a few announcements to make between now and the election. But in terms of the big, headline items, they're pretty much mostly out there now.
You're back in the.
Shannon Halbert, has you had any official complaints come to you about his behaviour?
No official complaints have come to me.
Have any gone to parliamentary service?
Not that I am aware. Not that I have been notified of. Now it's possible. Based on the comments that I made last week, where I encouraged those people who have raised these concerns to do that directly with the Parliamentary Conduct Commissioner. I wouldn't necessarily be notified if that had happened, but to my knowledge, it has not.
And at the debate last night in Northcote, there was a bit of a fracas with some of his supporters, some Labor campaign people. They accused us of being sucked into a malicious gossip thing. Is that how you would describe it?
Look, I can't account for the comments of every member of the public.
They also they went up to Dan Bidwell's person there, who was weirdly filming us as we were doing it, confronted him, blocked him, and he was accusing them of assault. Is it getting a bit intense in Northcote?
Look, I haven't seen any evidence of that. Obviously, I can't account for the actions of every member of the public in an election campaign.
Are your supporters getting too combative?
No, I don't believe so. But like I said, I want everybody, my message to everybody would be, let's continue to conduct this election campaign in a way that respects everybody's right to be involved in the process.
In terms of tomorrow's debate, I mean, some of the criticism from the last one was it's a little bit dull, notwithstanding the moderator was excellent. Are you able to just kind of give us a little insight into your tactics for this time? Are you going to bring a bit more of the heat, a bit more of the fire, or what's your plan?
Well, look, it'll be a different debate. It's got a live audience, I understand, so that always brings a different element to a debate. Well, you'll just have to tune in tomorrow. I'm sure you'll be tuning in to see.
And what do you want to get across the line? What's success for you?
Well, look, one of the things that I will be speaking about, as I have been in the last week or two, is the risk of a change of government. There is a lot at stake at this election, and I want to make sure that New Zealanders understand what a National Act government would actually, a National Act New Zealand First government would actually mean for New Zealand.
Just on Pharmac, the ACT Party has talked about having economic productivity as being a greater factor in terms of what medicines are funded. Do you have any views on that? Maybe Aisha as well?
I'll let the Minister of Health answer that one.
Certainly not at the individual level. Someone shouldn't be refused access to medicine because of their status as a worker or a superannuitant or a parent, and there shouldn't be a judgment made about their economic productivity. Of course, when Pharmac takes which medicines it funds overall into account, it may well choose to think, well, this is the sort of thing that reverses disability to the level that might get someone back to work, and that is a valid thing to take into account.
Are there perverse outcomes that could come from having too much of a focus on that?
I think there's certainly a perverse outcome if you do that at the individual level and say that people who are not meeting someone's standard of economic productivity should be denied access to medicine.
Can I just get your reaction to National's Pharmac plan? Can they pay for all 13 drugs for $280 million over 4 years?
Yeah, look, I don't know, because my view is politicians shouldn't be involved in those sorts of negotiations. And essentially, by saying how much they're willing to pay for those 13 medicines, they've written a blank cheque to the pharmaceutical industry. They've removed Pharmac's ability to negotiate prices down and strike better deals on behalf of New Zealanders. One other thing that troubles me deeply about the Nationals plan is they based it on a report that explicitly didn't cover blood cancers. So people with leukemia, lymphoma and myeloma have nowhere to go under Nationals policy for treatment.
Have you got any idea of how many new drugs could be funded under your plan today?
I think we have to look at the track record that we've had of 72 new drugs funded across the time that we've been in government, and expect that would make similar sort of progress. I'd also point out that the types of drugs, now that we've had the sustained investment for several years that we're funding, have changed. We are funding biologics for cancer, like Keytruda. We are funding rare diseases medicines, like the funding Trikafta for cystic fibrosis and Spinraza for spinal muscular atrophy, as well as modern treatments for everyone's other needs for chronic conditions like diabetes and arthritis.
Can I just circle back to Ibrahim's comments? I mean, those comments are clearly being made in a way that he is trying to speak to Wellington Central voters about an issue that he thinks that Labour people there feel strongly about, right? You couple that with Greg O'Connor's comments as well. How troubling and problematic is it for you that your MPs are basically kind of now going rogue effectively and making comments that they think will get them an electorate seat because they've given up on Labour being in government?
The Labour Party's position for this election is very clear. There won't be a wealth tax or a capital gains tax. The Labour Party is a democratic organisation. I'm sure internally there'll continue to be debates about issues around taxation. There always have been, there always will be, as there are within the National Party and every other political party as well. But the manifesto that we put before the election will stand after the election.
The problem is, though, is that it wasn't Ibrahim talking about it from his own personal position. He was effectively putting words in your mouth by saying the leader now, for reasons that I understand, put it aside, but it's part of our discussions, and the Labour Party hasn't given up on that. You're the leader of the Labour Party. He's putting words in your mouth.
I have been very clear there won't be a wealth tax or a capital gains tax after the election.
So what does that say, though, about your MPs who are clearly going against what you're saying and putting you in a position where you're having to defend your own record?
I think he probably could have chosen his words more carefully.
Will you be having a conversation with him?
Of course.
And did you talk to Greg O'Connor about his comments?
Not directly.
Why not?
But he's well aware of my views.
The National Party's welfare plan would give beneficiaries 2 chances before they're financially sanctioned. The government doesn't give those chances. You can be sanctioned immediately. So are they kinder to beneficiaries than Labour?
I haven't looked at the detail of their plans, but overall the Welfare Expert Working Group found that sanctions don't actually work in terms of a way of getting people off benefits and into work. And I would note that the sanctions that we've removed were the ones that were forcing children to live in poverty.
You've been asked this a gazillion times. I'll ask it again. Can National pay for its tax cuts?
No, absolutely not. The National Party, this fundamentally is an issue of trust. The National Party are saying, just trust us, our numbers stack up, but they're not willing to show New Zealanders their numbers. That means that New Zealanders can't trust them. Cool.
Thanks.
You happy that all those sausage rolls didn't affect your blood pressure?
My blood